I know somebody that's here today that lost a diamond down this past week. Didn't you, Ginger? Didn't you lose a diamond down this week? Is that red clips or something? All right. You'll notice as we go through the message today that this is a pointless sermon. Now, by that I mean there won't be any points on the screen because I purposely wanted to make it so there wouldn't be any up there. And I don't know what that will do to your attention span. I hope it won't make it any shorter. But if you want something to kind of guide you along, you can use the discussion guide that's in the bulletin that you're supposed to be using during the week. This passage of Scripture is another one of our sermons that we're doing in this series, Sermons by the Seashore. And today we're back again at the Sea of Galilee, which also was called the Sea of Tiberias. And it's in John chapter 21, towards the end of Jesus' ministry on earth. And we'll compare it to another time when he did a very similar thing to what he's going to do in this passage earlier in his ministry. But I titled this, God Fishing. I'm passionate about fishing. I haven't been doing a whole lot of it because there's just other things that are more important to me. But hopefully one of these days I'll get a good boat and I'll be able to do more of it. You know? But right now I'm fishing for men. That's more important. John 21, starting with verse 1. After these things, Jesus manifested himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias, and he manifested himself in this way. Simon Peter and Thomas, called Didymus, and Nathanael of Cana of Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. They said to him, we will also come with you. They went out and got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. When the day was now breaking, Jesus stood on the beach, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. So Jesus said to them, children, you do not have any fish, do you? They answered him, no. And he said to them, cast the net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you will find a catch. So they cast, and then they were not able to haul it in because of the great number of fish. Therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. So when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put his outer garment back on, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. But the other disciples came in the little boat, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards away, dragging the net full of fish. So when they got out on the land, they saw a charcoal fire already laid, and fish placed on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish which you have now caught. Simon Peter went up and drew the net to the land, full of large fish, 153. And although they were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples ventured to question him, who are you? Knowing that it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and the fish likewise. This is now the third time that Jesus was manifested to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. Jesus had told the disciples earlier in the upper room that they were to go ahead of him to Galilee and wait for him. Now, you know, the disciples evidently were a lot like you and me because, you know, raise your hand if you like to wait. You know, wait at the doctor's office, wait to get your food when you go out to eat, and see very many hands. The disciples didn't like to wait either. We aren't told exactly how long they were waiting, but it evidently was a while. Jesus had appeared to them twice before. In verse 1, the word manifested is used, and it describes Jesus' appearing to them. Now, the first time Jesus manifested himself to them was in John chapter 20, verse 19, in the upper room. On that occasion, it was the first Lord's Day, or the first Sunday after he had resurrected. So, actually a week later. Thomas was not present at that particular time. If you recall, Thomas was the one who said, I won't believe you guys. They said, they'd seen Jesus, and he said, I'm not going to believe until I'm able to stick my finger in the holes in his hands and this place in his side. Well, a week later, the second time Jesus manifested himself in their presence is in John 20, verse 26. This time Thomas was there. And we know when Thomas saw Jesus, he didn't actually have to put his finger in the holes because he believed just by seeing him. But those are the first two times. And then this story that we're looking at this morning, this text, it's the third time Jesus manifested himself before them. For whatever reason, the disciples weren't able to recognize that it was Jesus. Now, they'd seen him twice before, most of them, but they still didn't recognize him. Now, could it be that his resurrected appearance was a little bit different? I don't know. Could be. I choose to think that it was because it was not really light out yet, and they'd been waiting, and they really weren't. They knew he was coming, but they didn't know when, and so, they were 100 yards away. I mean, if you were 100 yards away from me, I might be able to recognize you. My eyesight, maybe I wouldn't. But anyway, this third time, they see Jesus, but they don't know who it is. They've been waiting for a while, and on one particular night, Peter decides, hey, I'm going to go fishing. And the 6 guys that were also with him decide, well, we might as well go too. I mean, we've been here, we're just waiting, there's not really anything we can do, so let's go fishing. Now, some people say that, well, Peter and Andrew, James and John, who were fishermen when they were called to follow Jesus, they were giving up and they were going back to fishing. I don't think that's true here either. If I had nothing to do and had something to choose to do, I'd go fishing. And here we're talking about Peter, who had been a fisherman, and he has nothing to do, and he's just sitting around waiting. He decides, hey, rather than just sitting around here twiddling my thumbs, I'm going to go catch a fish. So the other guys say, well, we might as well do that too, because we're just twiddling our thumbs too. I don't think Peter was returning to his old way of life as a fisherman. He just wanted something to do. And so, the food supply could have been running fairly low. They had Jesus resurrected at least 2 weeks ahead of this time. So for 2 weeks, they hadn't had any income. They hadn't had any source of food unless they had something in the cupboard, And so maybe Peter wanted to go fishing because he was hungry. He wanted to catch a fish to eat. Or maybe they hoped to catch a big bunch of fish so they could sell some at the market and, resupply the old pocketbook a little bit. We know from this text there were 7 disciples present at this particular time. We know 5 of them by name. There was Peter, Thomas, Nathaniel, James, and John. The other 2 disciples aren't named. We can guess who they might have been. Probably Andrew, because he was Peter's brother, and they were in the fishing business together, and Philip, who was one of the first ones called as well. All 7 of them went fishing in the boat. Now, the boats that they would have used weren't that big, so the boat was pretty full with 7 guys in it. Okay? And they went fishing. They fished all night, and they didn't do it like we do. Take your spinning rod or your casting rod and tie a bait on the end of it, throw it out there and reel it in, and throw it out there and reel it in. They had a net. So, with 7 guys in this boat, somehow they found enough room to gather up this net and then throw it out and let it sink and then draw it tight together and then bring it back in to see if they caught anything. They did that all night long. Throwing the net, letting it sink, pulling it tight, bringing it back, seeing if they caught anything. They caught nothing all night long. Without Jesus, often what we try to do is a waste of time. We need Jesus to help us with what we're doing. Our text goes on to say that it was getting light out. Dawn was near. The disciples decided it was time to quit fishing because they hadn't caught anything. And as they start heading to shore, they can see the figure of a man on the shore. And as they get a little bit closer, about 100 yards away, they hear this man on the shore say something. He calls out a very common greeting, "Children." Maybe he did that so they wouldn't recognize him. If he would have used some other greeting, maybe they would have recognized him. But he uses the word "children," a very common greeting that just anybody would have probably used. So he didn't want them to just right away know who it was. Jesus was still in the teaching business. And he was wanting the disciples to learn something. He asked them if they caught anything, even though he already knew they didn't. Probably embarrassed, they all had to say no. You know, it's embarrassing when you go fishing and you don't catch anything, but to me, a bad day fishing is still better than a good day at work. Most of the time. Jesus was going to test their obedience. He tells them in verse 6, since they've caught nothing, they're still 100 yards out from shore, he says, "Cast your net on the right side of the boat." Here again, I don't think there was really any significance of them throwing and casting the net on the right side of the boat. I mean, if I'm out fishing and I haven't caught anything, I'm throwing everything in my tackle box at those fish, trying to catch something so I don't go home skunked. I can't believe that the disciples never tried the right side of the boat. I would have tried every side of the boat to catch a fish. And I think they did too. Jesus was just really testing their obedience to see if they would do what he said. These were seasoned fishermen who knew how to catch fish. The disciples, they were tired of fishing. They'd fished all night. They hadn't caught anything. They were discouraged. But nevertheless, they listened to this man who they didn't really know who it was on the shore, telling them to throw their net on the right side of the boat. They listened, possibly out of desperation. And because they obeyed, when they threw their net on the right side of the boat, they caught something. And when we listen to Jesus, when we obey him, when we follow his instructions, the end result's always going to be good. Because he's not going to do something with us or for us or to us that's not good for us. He just won't do it that way. And here's the amazing thing about this passage of Scripture. The result was such a great catch of fish that 7 rugged fishermen could not get them into the boat. They had to keep the net closed and drag it all the way to shore because they couldn't get it in the boat. The catch of fish was so large. And how many fish did our text say there was? 153. that tells me something. These must have been humongous fish. They weren't your average little bluegill. I mean, I think I could pull 153 bluegill in the boat all by myself. But these 7 guys couldn't get 153 fish into the boat. Does God have a sense of humor or what? First they hadn't caught a thing, and now they've caught so many fish they can't get them in the boat. I don't think there's anything significant with the number 153 other than the fact somebody had to count them in order for us to know that. The verse does say large fish. I thought about putting a picture of my large fish up on the screen. It's 6 foot 2 inches, 104 pounds. It's caught through the ice up in Canada with another guy. Some of you have maybe seen the picture, but these fish probably weren't that big, but 153 of them. Makes me just want to go fishing right now. See, the point is that when you obey something that God says to do, good things happen in a very large way. And I think that's significant. Because there didn't have to be 153 large fish. There could have just been 25 small fish. And that would have still shown that the disciples had obeyed, and when they did, they caught something. But Jesus went out of his way to make this a story that people would stand up and notice. And definitely, these 7 guys in the boat noticed. It was getting lighter out as all this was happening, and the boat was still 100 yards away. It was John, who was the disciple Jesus loved, who wrote this, who remembered an occasion, probably, where they'd been fishing before and caught a great number of fish. In Luke chapter 5, starting with the first verse. That happened shortly after Jesus had called some of the disciples to follow him. It hadn't been too long since John and his brother James had left their father in their nets and followed Jesus when this great catch of fish in Luke 5 took place. It's interesting that at the beginning of Jesus' ministry and at the end of Jesus' ministry, he uses a great catch of fish to teach a lesson. On the occasion in Luke chapter 5, towards the beginning of Jesus' ministry, they had fished all night too and not caught anything. Once Jesus told them to go back out into the deep, throw down their net, they did. And they caught so many fish, in Luke it says, their nets began to break. And they had to call a second boat who was up on the shore to come out and help them. And they started loading the fish into the boats, and it says both boats began to sink. There were so many fish they loaded into those 2 boats. John must have remembered that occasion. And the light bulb went on. And he knew who that guy on the shore must be. And so he tells Peter, "Hey, guess who that is up there? That's the Lord." Well, when Peter heard that, Peter does what Peter does. He tried to walk on the water again, but doesn't say anything about that here in this passage. It just says he threw on his outer garment. He had an inner garment on that they would have on when they were working or something. But he threw his outer garment on, he jumps in, and he swims to shore. When he knew that that was the Lord up there on the shore. John tells Peter that the man on the shore is the Lord, and Peter can't wait for the boat to get in. So Peter leaves with 6 guys holding the bag of fish and swims on without them. Well, I can just picture this in my mind as this boat with 6 guys in it now, because one has jumped and swam to shore. And I don't know how many guys it took to hold the net full of fish, but they evidently had to row the boat to get shore. And it took them a little while. So Peter got there first. And so Jesus is talking to Peter and inviting them to come and eat some fish that he's already got cooking. It would seem that this was all part of Jesus' plan. Remember, he's still teaching them. He was trying to teach them and give them a lesson that this catch of fish and the obedience that they demanded would have a great impact on them. You know, you and I, sometimes we have a night like the disciples had. It might not even be the nighttime. It might be in the daytime. Or we've been struggling and have not had any success at what we've been trying to do. So whatever your night may be, Jesus is wanting to help you through it. And he's wanting to help you provide a new day. And he will when you're obedient. It's important to note that even though Jesus provided a great catch of fish to the disciples, he was thinking ahead. The disciples still had to do the work. They still had to throw the net on the right side of the boat. They still had to drag the fish to shore. They had to get the boat to shore. When the disciples were obedient, good things happened. As the disciples got to shore, Peter already being there, they found that Jesus had a fire going and he was cooking fish and he had some bread. That tells me that Jesus had this plan before he got there. To bring the fish and the fire and the bread for this encounter with the disciples. Jesus, once again, became a servant. He got the wood for the fire, he got the fish, and he got the bread, and he was providing it for the disciples who had been fishing all night, not catching anything until he told them where to go. Much like he washed their feet. Jesus invited them to bring some of the fish they had caught, so these large fish, and join him with the fish he already had cooking. That reminded me of the feeding of the 5,000 that I preached about already. How that, with this boy's small lunch, they picked up 12 baskets full of leftovers. But Jesus said, okay, I'm providing the first go around. You bring some of your fish for seconds. Jesus always provides more than enough. He already had fish cooking, and he provided 153 fish for them to have seconds if they wanted. Even though the net was so full of fish, 7 guys couldn't haul it into the boat. In John's passage, in this account, it says the net didn't tear. I don't know if there's any significance in the fact that in Luke's account, which happened at the beginning of his ministry, the net was starting to tear. And this account, where it was full of large fish, they couldn't get it into the boat, it didn't tear. I don't really think there's a whole lot of speculation we can make there, but I just think it's a fact that even the full net didn't tear this time. This was an important lesson that the disciples were learning here. As they began to take over for Jesus after he ascended into heaven, they were going to run into some difficulties, some problems. Things wouldn't always go right. They would need this story to remember. It would be a great source of encouragement to them. To remind them that, no matter how things were going, no matter what was happening, as long as they were obedient, God would provide. They would need this encouragement and this lesson in obedience. Not too many more days and Pentecost would happen, as they were waiting for the Holy Spirit to come upon them, and as they would begin the church. And they would remember this story, how God's providing. And we need to remember this story too. Sometimes we are fishing and we catch nothing. That can be pretty discouraging. But then there's other times where we throw out the net. We catch a lot of fish and a very large bunch of fish. That's just the way it goes sometimes when you're fishing. Whether it's for fish or whether it's for men. The important thing is to be obedient. John highlights in his gospel 3 invitations. 3 invitations that Jesus gives to the disciples. The first invitation is in John 1:39, where Jesus said to some of the disciples, "Come, and you will see." The second invitation is in John chapter 7, verse 37. Jesus says, "If any is thirsty, let him come unto me and drink." And the third invitation is here in this text today, John 21, verse 12. "Come and have breakfast with me." We know from the New Testament, especially from the book of Acts, that the disciples took Jesus' invitation very seriously. Because they turned the world upside down for Jesus. They caught many more nets full of men and women, boys and girls. In fact, on Pentecost itself, there was almost 3,000 people who they caught in their net. And then a little bit later in the book of Acts, we see the number had climbed to 5,000. Their fishing for men turned out pretty good because they obeyed. Most of the disciples, in fact, were martyred for their faith because they were totally committed to fishing for men for Jesus. If you and I will go fishing for Jesus, He will take care of the results. He will provide the fish in the net. And sometimes the net may come back empty, but other times it come back full. He will always provide when we obey. Jesus is waiting for you to catch your net. He's waiting for you to go fish. Have you done so? We're going to be singing an invitation this morning, and it's an opportunity for you to say yes. But you see, before you can go fishing, you have to get into the boat. Peter said, "I'm going fishing." Will any of you join him? Will you go fishing too? And be obedient to the Lord? Let Him provide the fish. He knows exactly where they are. And this week He may show you where you're supposed to fish. He may show you the opportunity to speak for Him. to say a good word for him. So be looking for that. Get your tackle ready. He will show you if you're willing to go. You need to make a decision today. We invite you to come as we stand.